Welcome to Chandwell. My name is Michael and it has taken me 5 months to complete the station at Chandwell. In this 3-part series I'm going to show you how I built the largest of the station buildings. Running down the side of the tracks, the building is covered in graffiti along its back wall and inside the dingy fire escapes that were brutally installed in red brick in the 1960s. A cobbled, covered vineyard, glazed with 3 hipped roofs round the front, sits alongside the main entrance, which is a few steps down from the ground which gradually descends along the front of the station. The 20-metre, 66-foot high clock tower dominates the scene and sits beside the offices of the Visit Chandwell tourist board, complete with posters advertising Chandwell in its windows. Next door is Pippa's pantry. She has an offer on for eggs and chips at the moment. You should forgive her grammar, because they are super tasty. A couple of little buildings complete the station. One of them is home to Tim's Cars, Chandwell's premier taxi operator. Out the front of Tim's is the small memorial that was erected to commemorate the Chandwell-based young men who lost their lives in the 2 world wars. If you like the video, please use the thumbs up button, as this really does encourage me to make these videos and share my layout's progress with you all. I start all my scratch builds with a card mock-up. This station took more than most, and I've linked to the video where I explain my design process in the description below. With the serial packet mock-up in place, I decided to start with the back wall, because onto this would fit everything else in this build. I cut 2 layers of the wall from 0.5mm card. I drew the design in the free software Inkscape, printed it onto copier paper and then stuck that to the card. The arches of the windows were 1mm wider on the outer layer to give a recessed look to the completed building. This was a slightly different build to normal because of the graffiti on the back. I had to make sure that the graffiti lined up on both layers, and this was just a case of covering each layer with the same print. The back wall will almost never be seen, but I did have some fun with it, with the bricked up windows and the fire escapes. I thought it would be fun to model these dingy fire escapes cruelly punched through the lovely Victorian stonework in the 1960s. I made them by layering strips of 1mm card up to the floor height to represent steps, and then boxing them in using red brick covered in graffiti. I simply painted the steps a stone colour. This made simple boxes which could be glued to the back of the wall and topped off with a little roof of card. In place, the fire escapes make for a nice feature which can only be seen when filming from the back, but just like the under-arch advertising posters on Bridge Lane, I think it's the things which are hard to see which make the layout all the more interesting. I drew and coloured the graffiti in Inkscape, and each piece will mean something to someone who's watching this video. This building has downspouts that cross the wall where the graffiti is, so it was a challenge to make it look like the graffiti went across the downspout too. For this, I made simple black rectangles in Inkscape and clipped the graffiti on top of them. This had the effect of making it look like a slice of the graffiti was on a black background. I used the straight cut edge of a cereal packet and wrapped the graffiti covered rectangles around it. Once the glue was completely dry, and I left it overnight, I cut a sliver of the downspout off the edge. This left me with about 1mm of black card with the graffiti around 3 edges. It was then simply a case of mounting the downspout in the right location so that the graffiti on the downspout matched the graffiti on the wall behind it. I make all my scratch built buildings from the inside out. This gives a strong skeleton onto which to attach the outer walls and keep them all straight and in alignment. The internal structure of this station was quite intricate because of the way that the tower is set back into the structure of the building. It's like this to maintain the pleasing symmetry of the building as a whole. Designed in Inkscape, I simply added guidelines on the floor onto which to glue the internal walls, which were made from back-to-back 1mm card. The station is built into a hill which rises across the front of the building. Ground floor level is the same as platform height, so I used card strips to raise the floor height of the building to the correct level. With the internal walls in place, I had a solid surface to which to glue the back of the building, which due to its length was starting to bend a little. I made sure that the windows were in place in the wall before attaching it to the main building. I applied plenty of PVA glue to the edge of the building's floor and the edges and backs of the internal walls. It was then a case of pressing the wall to the inside skeleton and holding it in place with clamps and heavy bottles alongside the vineyard while the glue set. I made the tower in the same way as the back wall, 2 layers of 0.5mm card individually wrapped with stone texture around window openings which were different sizes on each layer. The openings which were different sizes were wrapped individually, but the little arches which don't have recesses were not wrapped until both layers were glued together. This makes them look more solid. I didn't wrap the opening for the clock, I just painted the card edges in stone colour. I added the clock face as a simple piece of printed white paper. My intention was that when lit from within with a bright LED, the white paper of the clock face would glow as if lit from within. It was vitally important for the tower to be glued together square, so I decided to glue the first 2 sides together away from the building. This allowed me to use the York model making magnetic clamps to keep everything square and true while the glue dried. Once the glue was set, I added copper tape to one of the sides to carry current to the LED I was going to use to light the clock at the top. Using copper tape allows me to get the power up the wall without having to route any relatively bulky wires. I glued the part complete tower to the main building. Once this was in place, I worked methodically floor by floor, adding the 4 internal walls and the floors. I wanted the floor below the clock to appear like a walkway around a central stone column. To this end, I made a simple 4-sided box which I glued in the centre of the floor. I made sure that the insides of the outer walls were covered in the stone texture, just using some offcuts. I used a 5mm warm white LED inside the top of the tower. I simply soldered a resistor and the LED to the copper tape which was visible at the top of the tower. Once I carried this over to the layout and held some wires to the bottom of the copper tape, I was really pleased and excited to see the effect of the lit up clock face. The LED by itself is very bright, but when seen shining through the paper of the clock face, it works just right. Of course, I made sure that the clocks show the same time as the departure board that is inside the station canopy. Once all the lighting was in place inside the clock, I glued on the final 2 faces of the tower. I was pleased that everything was square, and despite each face being created at a slightly different size and shape, it all aligned perfectly. This was because I took time in the design stage to understand how the tower overlaps with the rest of the main building, and how the 4 faces of the tower would interlock with each other. With the internal walls in place, I added a few tables around the inside of Pippa's pantry. These are simply little squares of cereal packet sitting on a little square base. They're low quality, but they will only be glimpsed through the windows, and they are here to hint at interior detail. There's an advert for the Weir pub on Pippa's back wall. Next door, in the Visit Chandwell tourist board office, there are posters advertising Chandwell. It's unlikely you will ever see these, but it was fun to do, and it ties everything together nicely. In the next episode of this mini-series, I will show you how I made the front wall of the station and the covered vineyard. I will show the construction of the station and tower roofs and some of the little details that enhance the buildings. I'll also show you how I made this tiny war memorial, which only 33mm high is the smallest thing I've ever tried to make out of card and paper. So please check back in a week and watch that episode. In the meantime, thank you for watching, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.